Would you interview a candidate from a walking treadmill? And if you were at a desk, would you care if it was the candidate that was on a walking treadmill? Why am I asking this? Because I was just on the We're Not Recording podcast by Ethena with their CEO, Roxanne Petraeus, and their Chief People Officer, Melanie Naranjo. And this came up because Melanie told Roxanne, there's a Glassdoor review that everybody knows about, but we were afraid to tell you. Well, I won't spoil it. I'll show you what happened.
We had someone give us a Glassdoor review, and they were livid. They were livid. And one of the reasons they were livid, Roxanne, was because of you. And it was because you had the audacity to come to their interview on your walking treadmill. And they thought that was so offensive.
Ashley,
you were on a
coach me.
treadmill.
What do you think? What should I do in this situation?
You can listen to or watch the full podcast for my thoughts. But a few things. One, how often do you get to hear a podcast where a CEO finds out real time about a Glassdoor review from the Chief People Officer, and they tell them, we've basically been hiding this from you? Not often. So I thought it was great to hear that kind of exchange. But two, some of the things I talk about are the power dynamic. That anytime, especially when it's an interview, there's a lot of pressure on that candidate. In times, Melanie was saying, a candidate that we would want to work for us here at Ethena, they'd be curious about it. And so if they show up and Roxanne is walking on a walking treadmill, they should stop and ask and say, that's pretty cool. But one point I had is that you never know the environment that people come from. That sure, ideally, everybody that has natural, curious thoughts would bring those up in an interview, whether you're the candidate applying for the job or you're the interviewer. But frequently, candidates, there's a reason they're applying from their current job or wherever they last left, because they may not have been in an environment where that was encouraged. And so often, when you're in a job interview, whether you're an HR or you're a hiring manager or just part of that interview process, is remembering the other person on the side, they don't probably see themselves or feel like they're an equal. They have all these sorts of questions that they're not likely to ask because oftentimes an interview, a job interview, especially in this economy, can feel like a reality show, like you're just trying to win the job. And so sometimes it's remembering that you'd love to have candidates that come prepared and ask all sorts of questions, but often you have people that may have exceptional skills that would be the perfect candidate for that role and grow with your organization, but they don't feel comfortable asking those natural questions. And so the big tip that I'd given is thinking about if you're doing something, especially that could seem odd to somebody else, like it's not every day you show up and somebody's on a call, rather than having them ask a question if they're interested, proactively addressing it. And in the Fuller podcast, that part of it didn't even make air, I talked about how, as part, there's even an idea of a CEO interviewing for a role, because this role in particular was more of a junior sales role. And so sometimes in an organization, especially a tech, effectively startup, which is what Ethena is, that a junior salesperson, they may wonder why they're interviewing with the CEO, and sometimes that can show, we're taking this role fairly seriously. At other times, that can show a CEO that wants their hands in every level of the business. And so even addressing not just this aspect of a walking treadmill, but even when it's a CEO interviewing, sometimes to say, I'm part of this interview process because I want to talk about why I founded the organization and I trust my team, but it's important that you get to know leaders as much as you can in the interview. And that can help because, again, some of those natural questions may be, okay, is this somebody that's going to be questioning everything I do, or is this an environment where they're trying to welcome me? And so sometimes conversations like this, which was a CEO and a chief people officer, both of a company, and me, who has my own company providing manager training, conversations like this are really helpful. Because as managers, you don't always get together to talk about these real life scenarios. You don't talk about, what would you do in this situation? Hey, this person had a thought on this situation. This candidate didn't like it? Don't we want candidates that would be comfortable seeing someone on a walking treadmill? When hearing the other perspective of, sure, but you may be missing out on great candidates if that person not asking that question because they didn't come from an environment where questions were encouraged, you may miss out on them if you're not realizing the value of proactively talking about it. And so coming out of that conversation, Roxanne, again, you can listen to the full thing, but she's decided that she's going to talk about it from now on. But this is just one example, and it may not be the most everyday example, but a helpful one to have with your teams. Even if you're a team of one, sometimes it's getting together and talking to different managers about real life situations. What would you do and say in this situation? Because someone doesn't have to have your exact role to be able to give you tips or advice. Oftentimes it's helpful if they don't have all of that context and background. So that's why when I do manager trainings, our manager whole program is a blend including all the materials organizations need to not just provide managers on-demand learning, but also have manager cohorts. So you come together and get scenarios and you respond to them. So you talk about questions, you give each other feedback. And I often say, like, the value in it is the experience that I and my team bring from everything in the manager training, but often the real value is pieces of information and tips that different managers get from each other in those sessions. Someone says something and someone else asks, like, what was that? And the other person didn't even think it was a big thing they said. But frequently hearing those tips from others can shape your perspective as a manager. And so creating opportunities to do that is one of the most important things that HR and people teams can do. So coming off this conversation, you can go and listen to the full thing. But I really loved it because this getting together and talking about things among managers is exactly what we help organizations to do. And we facilitate those at times. I help to do that. But often it's giving all the tools that organizations need to be able to do it themselves and be able to make it stick.